Britain's Deadliest Doormen, Southeast versus the Northeast, Part 2. 1. Russian Andre versus Paddy Comrie. Russian Andre, a physical phenom. In his early 50s, he still works at the highest level in security and is in peak condition. After brutal years in a Siberian military conscription camp, Andre moved to England post the Soviet Union breaking up. He and his Eastern European friends were recruited by Mick Kelly, a big security boss in the late 90s, to clean up the toughest pubs and clubs in London and Essex. A fearless fighter who hits first and asks questions later. Built a big reputation in Basildon. Big documentary coming soon on Mick and Andre. One tough guy but a perfect gentleman. I've seen footage of Andre in action and reality matches the reputation. Paddy Comrie.
And he picked up a chainsaw and threatened to use it on his head.
Conroy hit him so hard on the legs with a stick that it snapped in two. He was handcuffed and his legs trussed up to his chest with a rope.
Makes the Northeast list for his huge reputation in Newcastle and across the UK for his escape from custody, battles with the police, and at one point he was allegedly the head of a criminal syndicate that was at the top of the National Crime Agency's hit list. I'm reliably told in his heyday, both he and his brother Michael could have a right row on the cobbles. He worked the door for a while as a young man for Big Billy Robinson. I've got to pick my friend Andre for my team here, a remarkable character who is definitely the real deal on the doors. 2. Dom Negus versus Dave Garside.
No. I don't care who you are, whether you're going over. And he managed to fight off 3 geezers with an axe in his head.
Big Dom Negus, a powerhouse of a man, good ex-pro boxer and an enforcer. Post-boxing, he worked with the infamous Vic Dark until a brutal attack on him, ordered by a feared crime family, made him think twice about his career choice. A very tough man in the ring and the cobbles. Dave Garside, champion pro boxer from the Northeast. On the outside, he was involved in security and had several violent clashes with Big Brian Cockrell. Now a respected coach. Hard man who will be up there on any list. I've got to go with Dom Negus on this one. I just think his size, his strength and aggression, I think I would have to plug for Dom and have him on my team for this one. 3. Roy Shaw versus Stu Watson. Roy Shaw worked the doors for a short period in London and lived in Essex most of his life. To make the list. Once classed as Britain's most violent prisoner, he was allegedly responsible for several deaths inside, which I'll go into detail on another video. In the unlicensed game, had a great rivalry with Big Lenny McLean and was also a successful businessman. R.I.P. Roy. Top man. Stu Watson, real tough hard man turned healer, was once a victim of a ferocious attack by Viv Graham, who featured in part 1. He didn't go down and took a lot of punishment without falling. A very hard man who has to be on the Northeast list. This one, I've got to go with Roy Shaw, absolute legend, although Stu Watson as tough as they come. 4. Danny Benn versus Ernie Buick. Danny Benn, the older brother of champion boxer Nigel Benn, could have made it as a pro, but suffered a terrible stabbing injury whilst working the door in Essex. A guy who, according to his brother Nigel, is a huge handful. Anyone silly enough to cross him makes the Southeast list. Ernie Buick, the Sunderland Rocky Marciano, was a big security boss in Sunderland and the Northeast. A great boxer, he beat Viv Graham in the ring and was a feared fighter on the cobbles. Had an arranged fight with Big Billy Robinson, which he won after a tough fight, despite a sly punch by fair play man Viv Graham. Spent time in prison for a tragic manslaughter charge after a fight with another serious face from the area. Well respected and liked in the Northeast, Ernie has to make my team. 5. Ian Lucky Tucker versus Big Billy Robinson.
Went out the door, look a shot. He went left and I went right, but I got him. Just oh, no. He said, I really think you're. I went, crack. I've hit him. Oh, his head hit the floor first. It was a lovely one, wasn't it?
Ian Lucky Tucker, the late Dave Courtney's right-hand man, allegedly a serious fellow on the street, and was on the door. Through the mad 90s, he was involved in all sorts of skullduggery and was one of Courtney's close friends and most reliable heavies. Came to infamy in a Donald McIntyre documentary. Big Billy, the governor of Felling.
Proper man, as somebody saying, Yeah, come on, I'll fight you. You know what I mean? And stand toe to toe. And when it's finished, shake hands. You know, that's what I've always done. I've always picked people up, you know, and made sure they're all right.
In his day, was probably the hardest man in Newcastle. A big, powerful man who would fight anybody. Was shot by a member of a big crime family in Newcastle, which he recovered from. But was another one of the tough guys who enemies would bring tools to the table to level things up. Widely regarded as a gentleman of the old school, Billy is etched into Northeast folklore. I've got to go with Billy Robinson on this one. Old school, experience, in his day, probably one of the hardest men in the country to have a straight go with. 6. Mark Potter versus Richie Horsley.
Well, is this big dude a boxer just like Mark Potter? Well, he doesn't like being hit, that's for sure.
The late Mark Potter was another good pro boxer and unlicensed fighter. An absolute gentleman who tragically died from a terminal illness. Prior to this, I'm told he ran a pub and worked the doors. His boxing ability makes him a top man on this list. I didn't realise he worked the door, but one of my subs put his name up there to confirm he did. So he's got to make the list. Rest in peace, Mark. Richie Horsley, as tough as they come, a good boxer and a boxing historian, made a reputation as one of the hardest men in the Northeast, with many street fights and fights on the door. He was once rumoured to be lined up to fight Charlie Bronson, but this didn't come to fruition. I'm told a very nice guy, but one who can seriously handle his business. So that one has got to go to Mark Potter. Rest in peace, Mark. Professional boxer, done cage fighting, very, very tough man. When I found out he worked the door, he would be right up there at the top of the list. 7. Big Dean versus Paul Debrick. Dean's a powerhouse of a man, with huge arms and physical strength. Russian Andre's partner on the door, and a man who also worked with East End legend, Vic Dark, for a period of time. An absolute gentleman who has a fascinating story to tell in his own right. Paul the Brick Debrick, a legendary figure for Middlesbrough's hooligan firm, the front line, but also at the door. A big unit who could have a right fight, so must make the North East list. Like many football lads from that era, sadly passed away now, but his legend lives on. It's a tough one this, as Dean's the real deal on the door and a unit of a man. But the Brick's a legend in Middlesbrough and a force of nature. I've got to go the Brick on this one, so as not to show favouritism, but would gladly have either of these men. 8. Lenny McLean versus Paul Sykes. Lenny McLean, a man mountain who was known as the hardest man in London or the king of the bouncers, a title fitting for the 6'2" powerhouse whose ferocious fighting ability on the cobbles and as an unlicensed boxer made headline news. As a doorman, he was sitting in his office smoking rollies and eating Chinese whilst his lads would deal with the punters. If anything came up too much for them to handle, he would steam out and dish out a couple of slaps with his huge hands, which would usually be enough to render the troublemakers unconscious. Not a pro boxer, but allegedly unbeaten on the cobbles. Paul Sykes, a class Wakefield boxer who was included as no Yorkshire video. Fought for the British title, losing to John L. Gardner. He became infamous inside Britain's prisons for his antics, which included terrorising some prisoners and staff alike. Allegations of abuse of younger prisoners followed him around, but he was never charged for those rumours. Both men were seen as bullies in some quarters, and there was no question in the ring Paul Sykes would have beaten Lenny easily, but on the cobbles I think would have been a tighter contest. As this is me picking a door team, I'd have to go for the king of the bouncers, as I don't think Sykes did much door work through his life. If you ask me who would have won in a street fight, I'd have to say a prime Paul Sykes would have beaten a prime Lenny. I've spoken to many people who knew Lenny and have sparred or seen him fight, and he did have problems with professional fighters who didn't panic when he launched his ferocious attacks. Lenny suffered from stamina issues, which is why the use of the head, biting and kicking came in useful to finish fights in the street quicker. So the South East go through to face Liverpool in the next round. If you hit the notifications, you can be obviously notified when that video comes out. Please remember This is just a bit of fun. It's just me picking a historic door team from one area against the other. It's not that Mark Potter could beat Richie Horsley in a fight, or this person could beat that in a fight. Nothing to do with that. It's just me deciding on who I would have in my fantasy door team if I was running a club, or I was trying to pick the most elite door team from across the country. And that's what it's about. Obviously, I look forward to reading your comments, as per usual. And that's it. I'm out. Till next time.